MCQ 14 have us shift our focus towards transport in human. So we're looking at the composition of blood difference at point X as well as in point Y. So point X itself comes from the pulmonary artery. So if we were to trace backwards, the pulmonary artery will receive deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle. And tracing one more step backwards, the right ventricle receives deoxygenated blood from the right atrium. And one more backward trace, the right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the vena cava. And one last trace, the deoxygenated blood comes from the rest of the body, which has actually undergone aerobic respiration. Now, on the Y segment, which is a branch of the pulmonary vein, this actually has oxygenated blood sent back into the heart towards the first chamber, the left atrium, and followed by the left ventricle, exiting the heart via the aorta, and this will then be delivered towards the rest of the body. Again, if I'm going to use red to represent oxygenated blood and purple to represent deoxygenated blood, we can take a look at the contents of how it actually changes. So prior to that, please remember that the alveoli is actually the part of the lungs that's actually involved in gaseous exchange. So starting with the deoxygenated blood at the rest of the body, the vena cava, right atrium, right ventricle. So as it passes through into the capillaries, alright, that wraps around the alveoli, we're looking for gaseous exchange that have our blood exchange with the inspired air in the alveoli for oxygenated blood. So by the time that it leaves via the pulmonary vein outwards, to the left atrium is oxygenated, the ventricle is oxygenated, the aorta is oxygenated, and to the rest of the body is oxygenated. So again, this is gaseous exchange at the lungs, but the body reverses this because it undergoes aerobic respiration. So again, comparing with X and Y, X itself should have a higher amount of carbon dioxide because it's mostly deoxygenated blood. Glucose itself, it should be more because we have to remember again the alveoli is considered to be a living cell, and as a living cell it has to undergo aerobic respiration. So it does actually takes a bit of the glucose that's found in the pulmonary artery for its own aerobic respiration process. So X have a little bit more glucose as compared to Y because the alveoli has consumed some of the glucose, and the oxygen in this case here that we see over at Y, it should actually be considered to be more. But because the question over here didn't compare Y to X but rather X to Y, I would then say that the amount of oxygen that's found at X as compared to that of Y, it should be lesser because it is deoxygenated. So the little bit of the trick here is the glucose component. A lot of students probably use the word the same because they did not acknowledge that the alveoli actually has to respire. So the answer for MCQ 14 is C.